Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the 1982 American superhero film adaptation, Swamp Thing. Now, this was written and directed by Wes Craven. It was based on a comic book series that I don't really have a lot of familiarity with, but I was willing to track it down and give it a shot because it is one of the few blind spots I have left in Wes Craven's filmography. So with that being said, let's get into my thoughts on the film. Let's review Swamp Thing. The film follows a group of scientists led by Ray Wise, and then obviously Adrienne Barbeau comes in, and she's the newcomer to this project that is a highly secretive project by the United States government, one that is sort of looking into plants and trying to use weird formulas to sort of grow plants in weird and unique ways that could benefit humanity, or of course be used as some sort of military application. That's probably why the government is so interested in this thing. I mean, it's kind of not really super fully developed what the whole backstory is here, but I do find the setup pretty interesting enough. And of course, they're trying to constantly combat against the evil Arcane, who's this sort of sinister businessman that has his own militia that ends up coming in and taking over. And that's kind of the setup of the movie. Then you have a large chunk of the time, of the runtime of the movie, featuring Adrienne Barbeau, essentially playing a damsel in distress over and over again, being a sort of sex symbol for the movie and hoping that that's going to capture the attention of the audience more so than a well-developed plot. Really, what this movie comes down to in the middle is Barbeau goes somewhere in the swamp, then you have the swarm of the militia of Arcane's people. They come in to try and capture her, to use her as bait to get Swamp Thing to come out. Then they try and fight Swamp Thing, and he just basically beats them all up repeatedly in the most comical ways while he's in this rubber suit. And that's basically the plot for a huge chunk of it. And then eventually we get to the point where it sets up for a big, final climactic battle between the forces of good and evil, though they're still in rubber suits. Now, this is a film that suffers, obviously, from its very limited budget, and of course, Wes Craven had a lot of experience up to this point in his career on trying to make magic out of limited means, but he's struggling in this movie because I think there is so many obvious limitations for a movie of this type. If you're making a more sort of docudrama horror film, like something like Last on the House on the Left, the lower budget maybe you can get away with, but something like this, it needs a little bit of a more substantial budget and sort of backing from the studio. That's not what it was getting here, and I think that you see the cracks in the artifice very often, and it is something that really does hamper the film quite significantly. Obviously, in the super obvious fake rubber suits, which do have a bit of a charm to them, but they also just look completely stupid. Even at the time, I'm sure they looked dumb, and I think that you can tell as well by a lot of just the limited locations, the limited ability to do anything with the action scenes. The editing is terrible. I don't know if that's necessarily just due to the low budget, if they couldn't get an actual good editor, but they use all these weird swipes and transitions that are super distracting and feel completely amateurish, which it's fine if you use like a couple of them, but they were doing it constantly, and it really does like detract from the film. I guess it gives it a little bit of a charm too, and a little bit of campiness, which is really what shines through in this movie, is it feels very campy, but I don't think that was intentional. I think this is a movie that was attempting to be serious, attempting to have some serious characterization, depth, and heart to it. I think Craven really was trying to send messages and have serious thematic depth in this movie, and not just be, a simple superhero movie. That being said, though, I think that stuff sort of, it's there, but it struggles to find life in a movie that is hampered so significantly by the low budget nature of it, by the silliness and campiness of it all. And I can enjoy that for sure, but I can tell that there is the makings of a much better movie within the sort of heart of this campy, unserious, kind of ridiculous movie. So yeah, the film stars Adrienne Barbeau, it stars Ray Wise, like I mentioned before. It also stars Louis Jordan as Arcane, and it also has David Hess, who played Krug in Last House on the Left. He's sort of one of the militia sort of henchmen, and he's so ridiculous and dumb in this movie. Now, Arcane is a bit of a campy and silly villain, though his characterization does unfortunately kind of ring true with a lot of modern day elites and villains that we see in our contemporary life, and this idea of sort of ultra wealth being a factor of like completely detaching yourself from reality and viewing yourself above other humans and trying to transcend the limitations of humanity, trying to become immortal and things like that. So that is something that is still absolutely true to this day. And so it makes this characterization as sort of silly as it can be. Comic book villains, in a lot of ways, are true villains, and they are ones that you see in everyday life, as ridiculous and silly as they can seem. The ultra wealthy can do a lot of ridiculous and insane things with the power and the access to resources that they have. And I think this is something that makes this film have a little bit more depth, and especially the way that they sort of show the militarization of science and the way that that was being used and deployed by the United States government, and the sort of espionage and paranoia and sort of all sorts of interesting political things going on behind the scenes here in this movie. But a lot of that stuff can't really come up to the surface because the writing is so poor, because the editing is so distracting, because the budget is so limited and they can only do so much, because it's so boring and monotonous towards the middle of the film. So we have a really interesting opening. We have a ridiculous, silly, but ultimately kind of interesting, or at least worth watching finale. And so that you kind of get this weird mixed bag that's very uneven. And so it's hard to fully recommend this movie, even if you're like a fan of Wes Craven. Unless you're a Wes Craven completist or you like superhero films and you like to see sort of before they became so formulaic and sort of so everything nowadays has to be a larger sort of industry into itself. You can't just make sort of these interesting standalone superhero comic book adaptations. This was one of those early ones that was attempting to try and do something different on a lower budget, and I respect that. Though I do think that a lot of the budget limitations and a lot of the sort of lackluster execution on their ideas, I think really does hamper this movie and makes it so it can't really be a good film or one I would fully recommend, even though it is an enjoyable movie with some campy fun to it. And there is some fun with the rubber suit battles. That's fun. There's all sorts of little moments that are interesting and goofy and make you laugh, but it's also kind of a boring movie at the same time. So it's just this weird mixed bag. It's one that I don't really know fully. I think I would rank it towards the bottom of Wes Craven's filmography, but he's always been a very inconsistent director. He's never always been able to put a bunch of movies together in a row that are all really excellent. I think he did towards the sort of middle to late part of his career once he started making the Scream movies, and a little bit before that with New Nightmare and The People Under the Stairs. But especially early in his career, with those limited budgets he was always working with, or when he was working on television, the execution was not always to the level of the ideas in his head. And I think that's apparent here in this movie, where there was a clear attempt to make something interesting, to make something worthwhile and with some depth to it. But it ends up kind of becoming this campy, schlocky cult classic, if anything, though I'm not sure how many people really love this movie. I know it had some positive reviews. I know Roger Ebert gave it a positive review. I know there is fans of this movie, but not that much. And I think that's sort of the level it's always going to be at, is this sort of under the radar cult classic type movie that most people aren't going to really be able to appreciate that much, but you can have some fun with it if you try and you're open-minded to it. Though, like I said, I can't give it a full recommendation, and that's all I can really say for Swamp Thing. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I drop a new video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.